Good evening, everyone. I'm Utkarsh, the coordinator for communication and events at the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, or FAS, as it is more commonly known as. On behalf of FAS, I welcome you all to the first seminar of our FAS Young Scholars Online Seminar Series 2024-25. Please note that this session is being recorded and it will be made available on YouTube in the future. I now invite Dr. Sandeepan Bakshi, Director at the Foundation, to speak a few words about the series and the Foundation. Sandeepan, over to you.
Thank you, Utkarsh. And am I audible, Utkarsh?
Yes.
You
Thank
are.
you.
You are.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the FAS Young Scholars Online Seminar Series. I'm Sandeepan, Director at the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, better known as FAS, as Utkarsh just told us. On behalf of the FAS, let me once again warmly welcome you all to the first seminar of the third round of Young Scholars Seminar Series 24-25. We are resuming after a gap of a few months. The last seminar of the second round of the series was in March 2024, and we are very glad to come back with an exciting list of young scholars who, in the course of these next 8 months, 8 seminars, will present some aspects of their doctoral research. While I understand that many of you are already aware of the foundation and its work, and especially of the concept of this seminar series, but this being the first of this round, I hope you would not mind giving me a few minutes to reiterate our vision. FAS is more than 2 decades old research organization based in Bangalore, India. We have engaged with the study of rural India and rural economics of other parts of the developing world for a very long span now. One of our major activities is to conduct village studies as part of a long-running research program called the Project on Agrarian Relations in India. These studies have helped us develop a rich archive of primary data on many aspects of the Indian countryside pertaining to production, different aspects of the village economy, and the livelihoods and living standards of different sections of rural households. But what was, or rather what is, the major motivation for getting on with these detailed studies of the rural economy? It was a realization that the contemporary Indian countryside, or countryside in other developing countries, economies as well, portrays a peculiar dialectic of continuity and change. While certain aspects of the rural economy and the village structure haven't changed much, unfortunately so, there are a number of other aspects that are rapidly changing. The non-farm sector's growing influence, the nature of agriculture and non-agricultural wage work, labor relations, women's role in production and economy, the adoption of new technologies, concerns pertaining to a changing climate, to name a few, are leading to many new dimensions, many new questions to study in the rural economy. But rigorous scientific and systematic scholarship on the rural, unfortunately, has been lagging behind for a while now. While individual efforts by some senior scholars can and of course does play an important role in addressing this lacuna, it also requires systematic and institutional efforts, especially to encourage the engagement of more and more young researchers with the study of rural economy. And this has been a crucial part of the thinking and of the activities of FAS. It has been our legacy to work with young scholars and provide them relevant platforms and consistently try to build their networks. The Young Scholar Seminar Series is another step, or has been another step in this direction. And it gives me immense pleasure to say that we have seen some success in this effort. The testimony to this success is the number of, we were speaking with Professor Rajshree a while ago, about the number of applications that we had received as a response to the call for this seminar. And we had to devise a systematic method of shortlisting, assessing almost 100 applications. But there is, of course, a long way to go. this small network of young scholars that we have been able to develop, it needs consistent expansion in a geographical sense and in terms of quality. It needs strengthening and it needs consolidation. I hope that this round of seminars will be an important step in this direction. I sincerely request you all to participate in this endeavor of ours and think of ways to collaborate, help us work together. This is the hope, this is the expectation with which we open this round of the seminar series by welcoming the one person who has been central to this whole exercise, Professor Barbara Harris-White, Emeritus Professor of Development Studies at the University of Oxford. Professor Barbara's enthusiasm has in some sense kept us going seminar after seminar, and now we can safely say year after year. We cannot thank her enough for this. I request you, Professor Barbara, to take over the proceedings of today's seminars from here on. Professor Barbara.
Thank you very much, Sandipan. Welcome to everybody online whom we can't see in the new formulation, the tech formulation. It's a pleasure and a privilege to chair this seminar and to share in the development of a network and an epistemic community of kindred spirits of the kind that Sandipan has been talking about. And to do that, we look, we listen, we think, we chat. We chat in the chat box. And we also tell kindred spirits to register and to join in. And I hope that will happen from month to month. We have a wonderful lineup. The foundation has taken great care, long listing, short listing, and finally selecting 8 very interesting presentations and people, scholars, who are studying everything from the non-farm economy and agribusiness markets, rural capital, to labor, gender, caste, environment, and water. And I look forward enormously to the discussions that are going to take place over the next 8 months. Now, today we have Ritwika Patgiri, who's an economics PhD student at the South Asian University in Delhi, and she's going to talk about rural transformation and the non-farm economy with special relationship to Assam. And also, she's going to look at the relationship between these transformations and poverty. And this is quite a complicated task to which we all look forward. It will be discussed by Professor Rajshree Bedamatta from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in the IIT Guwahati, who works on food systems and agrarian change, rural labor, and various kinds of outcomes and inputs, such as education and nutrition. So a very well qualified discussant. The formula is as follows. The speaker is invited to speak to up to 30 minutes, not much longer. The discussant up to 10 minutes, after which we will open it to question and answer and discussion from the chat box, which I will attempt to moderate. And I may or may not join in myself. Anyway, without further ado, over to you, Ritwika. We are all interested in what you have to say.
I'll just share my screen. Hello, everyone. This is Ritwika Patgiri. I'm a PhD scholar at the Faculty of Economics, South Asian University. And the topic I'm presenting about today is rural transformation and the non-farm economy, evidence from Assam. Okay, so Utkarsh, can we move to the next slide? Okay, so here I go. Before I get into my presentation, I just want to quickly give an overview of what I'm planning to do. So I want to understand, or I want to explore how employment in non-farm activities, in rural non-farm activities, impacts household poverty levels. And for this, I have done, this is a part of my PhD work. So for this, I have done a field work covering 329 households across 18 villages in 6 districts of Assam. So I'm just, before getting into all the work, I just want to give a quick introduction of why we are doing this and in the context of Assam. urban industry-led growth has been fairly uneven. And despite industrial growth in many sections of the world, the distribution of income and poverty has been fairly uneven. And a vast majority of the poor live in rural areas, especially in the developing world. And it's especially in a country like India, where more than 70% of the population of the country belongs to the rural. In such a situation, we can also see that the rural has been transforming a lot. There are several village level studies, long-term village level studies in India, which have found how the rural has been going through significant changes over the years. For example, if we look at the Slater villages, which show that how the emergence of the non-farm sector and diversification of income, along with rural migration, have become significant drivers of change since the 1980s and to the early 21st century. Similarly, study of a village called Palanpur has shown how the emergence of the non-farm sector has been a significant driver of change. And this emergence of the rural non-farm sector goes along with the supplement of as a supplementary income, while the per capita household or the per capita agricultural income has been falling. Similarly, Judith Hare saw how the knitwear industry in Tirupur, with the expansion of the knitwear industry, the share of employment in agriculture has come down, and there has been a rise in agricultural wages. Similarly, the village studies in Tripura have seen how there has been a persistence of manual worker households along with diversification of income. So the rural has been changing, and the emergence of the non-farm sector and this rural transformation forms a central theme of what my presentation is today. But a question arises: what is the impact of such a transformation or of such an emergence of the rural non-farm sector on household poverty level? Next slide. So in the context of Assam, and basically why Assam, I just want to talk about how the dynamics, the trends, and the patterns of rural employment are geographically uneven. For example, if we look at Punjab or Haryana, which these are states which have reaped from the benefits of the Green Revolution, the diversification into non-farm activities has been very different. But from, let's say, states which have seen a more of a distress-led emergence of non-farm activities. For example, let's say in Tamil Nadu, which has seen more of a post-agrarian phase right now, or in a state like Kerala, where the proportion of households employed in agriculture is less as compared to the national average, and also has a history of rural non-farm activities. As such, the story of Assam becomes interesting since it's located on the other side of the chicken's neck. It is marked by a history of isolation, a history of insurgency, politics of immigration, and diverse demography. And along with that, it is also marked by a slow historical growth rate in agriculture and industry. And as such, the role of the service sector in the state becomes very important, which has emerged as the major driver of growth. And with the post-liberalization in of the Indian economy, all the three sectors of Assam's economy slowed down, labor-absorbing public sector activities like electricity, gas, water supply. The growth rate of all of these slowed down. So in such a context, the first decade of 2000 can be seen as a crucial point for Assam's growth story. This decade saw services growing rapidly. And while agriculture did see an initial fall, the growth rate of the manufacturing sector fell in the later part of the decade. Next slide. In the recent years, there have been two impact on the Indian economy. One was the impact of demonetization, and the other, the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 was in fact a very significant, can be termed as a significant turning point for the Indian economy. But for the case of Assam, we see that the growth rate of all three sectors, the service sector, the manufacturing sector, and agriculture sector, started falling by around 2018. Construction and public administration and other services have been the highest growing sectors in recent years for Assam. And public administration and other services, although are not labor absorbing sectors, so a growth rate in such sectors cannot be seen to be a very, something which absorbs labor or the growing rural population. Construction and unorganized manufacturing sectors, on the other hand, are both labor absorbing sectors, but they are also very precarious sectors and are marked by uncertain and low return jobs. Also, a deeper analysis of the labor market of Assam shows that the share of female employment in construction has witnessed a decline, and this has pushed the rural women to agriculture. In fact, according to the periodic labor force survey data of 2022-23, the state has recorded an increase in the share of agriculture in employment for the first time in the last 13 years. Next slide. In such a scenario where public sector cannot absorb the growing rural population and the emergence of other precarious sectors, we see that the role of the rural non-farm economy becomes very important. I've also done a more deeper analysis of the rural labor market, and what I saw was that the non-farm economy in Assam is marked by self-employment rather than casualization of labor. I have seen that from the data that young people are more likely to be engaged in rural non-farm activities as compared to the older generation. And I'll come to this further while talking about the findings from my field. Both non-farm self-employment and casual non-farm activities I found from the data to have negative relationships with years of formal education, indicating some level of distress. I also found that more than half of the non-farm self-employment in Assam is dominated by own account workers, which are with or without unpaid family labor, petty traders, and petty commodity producers, which are engaged in small-scale production and services. The state has also seen a very gendered form of casualization of rural non-farm employment, implying that the casual non-farm sector is mostly marked by male labor rather than female labor, which again I will talk about further in my findings from the field. Next slide. So with keeping this in context, I just want to briefly introduce my field. As I've already said, I've covered 6 districts of Assam. So I'll just talk about how I did my field work. So this was done using a multi-stage sampling. Assam has 6 agroclimatic zones. So I did a very purposive sampling of selecting one district from each of these 6 agroclimatic zones. The 6 districts selected were Nagaon, Honipur, Bongaigaon, Hailakandi, Dima Hasao, and Golaghat. Among these, Dima Hasao is a hill district. It's part of the Eastern Himalayan region. Honipur and Golaghat are part of what we call as the tea district. They have a high presence of tea estates, and Hailakandi is present on the Barak Valley and not in the Brahmaputra Valley. From each of these 6 districts, again, I did a purposive selection of 1 block each from each of these districts. This was done by looking at factors like agricultural productivity, irrigation levels, and demographic details of the blocks. From each of these 6 blocks, again, 3 villages each were selected, again, at a very purposive level. I spoke to the community, the local people, the community, the development officers, and by looking at, again, irrigation levels, agricultural productivity, the share of non-farm employment, the selection of these 18 villages were done. And from each of these villages, 8 to 10% of the households were selected at a random basis, which amounted to 329 households at the end. Next slide. The agrarian structure and the distribution of land gives us some idea again of what my field looked like. So I'll quickly talk about how, so basically almost 7% of the households surveyed were landless households, and a significant proportion were marginal households whose land ownership was around 0 to 1 hectare of land. So all of these landless households, none of these landless households, in fact, had cultivation as their major source of income. Most of these landless households were engaged in non-farm casual labor, and with some of these households engaged in non-farm self-employment activities again. And these these non-farm self-employment activities were mostly petty trading and petty businesses. The marginal landholders, the households, again, these households mostly were involved in casual non-farm activities, casual non-farm labor, and non-farm self-employment activities, again, like petty trading and petty businesses. Around 21% of these marginal landholders were engaged in regular salaried jobs, and around 8% of these marginal landowning households were, around 8% of these marginal landholding households had agriculture as the main source of income. Next slide. In terms of religion and caste composition, 70% of my households covered were Hindu households, and some 21% of the households were Muslim households. In terms of caste composition, again, 28% of the households covered were general category households. I want to give a small caveat here. So there was one issue in the data collection here. So all the Muslim households that I had surveyed identified themselves as general category households. So the Muslim households have mostly been categorized as general category households because that's how they identified. So this could be because of lack of awareness about caste, but that's what my field data was. Next slide. In terms of reported occupations, employment, and income, what we saw was close to 45% of all the workers involved, in my survey were involved in farm or some farm-related activities, either crop production or casual agricultural labor or livestock rearing. The hill district of Dima Hasao had the highest proportion of individuals engaged in cultivation. In terms of gender, what I found was that around 24% of the male workers in the age group of 15 to 60 were engaged in cultivation, while 17.51% of the female workers were engaged in cultivation. Female workers were largely involved in animal husbandry, and only 1.89% of the male workers, however, were involved in the same. So animal husbandry was seen to be a largely feminized domain from my field data. In terms of the non-farm activities, again, around 19% of the workers were engaged in casual non-agricultural labor, and around 18% were involved in manufacturing and trade activities. Again, these were very small-scale manufacturing activities. This includes petty shopkeepers, petty manufacturers, petty traders, and petty repairing shops. Around 4% of the workers were engaged in government sector, and around 8% were engaged in non-governmental activities. Next slide. So what I did was I tried to understand how the households could be categorized. So I categorized them into 6 types on the basis of their employment and the basis of their non-farm employment, and at the level at which the non-farm employment was done. This is mostly because the nature of the non-farm activities is not homogeneous in nature. Some of them were high returning, while some of them were very low returning. At the same time, households were engaged in these activities at different levels. Some of them had multiple sources of income, and some of them only were engaged in one source of income. So again, this categorization was done on the basis of the share of income in the household. So I'll briefly explain what my categorization includes. The farm households. So these were mostly agricultural households. They might or might not have other shares of income, but the large share of their income came from agriculture or agriculture-related activities. Similarly, pluri-casual non-farm households, they have income from casual non-farm labor as their highest source of income, but they were also involved in other sources of income. These other sources could have been crop production, livestock rearing, remittances, regular salary jobs, etc. The regular non-farm households, again, were engaged in regular salary jobs. The pluri-self-employed non-farm households, again, had a large share of their income coming from non-farm self-employment activities, but also had other sources of income. And the purely self-employed non-farm households had non-farm self-employment activities as their major source of income, or the only major source of income. From my survey, around 30.4% of the surveyed households were pluri-casual non-farm households. That's the highest proportion. And around 20.9% were pluri-self-employed non-farm households. Next slide. So just to look at how non-farm engagement in non-farm sectors have any relationship with land ownership, what I found was there were some interesting insights. So I've already discussed this. 56% of the landlords workers were engaged in mostly casual non-farm labor. And in case of the marginal landholders, around 38% of these workers were engaged in agriculture. Workers from marginal landholding households were either engaged in casual non-farm work or in petty business or petty trading. What was also interesting was as the size of the landholding increased, the proportion of the cultivators or workers engaged in cultivation increased. Further analysis of the incidence of landlessness among these various workers showed that the no landless worker was engaged in cultivation, which I've already mentioned, that no landless household was seen to be engaged in agriculture. Landlessness is lowest among all the agricultural workers, and workers engaged in cultivation were mostly possessed agricultural land of more than 1 hectare. Next slide. In terms of age and engagement, again, this was very interesting. So we saw that there was as the age range increased, the concentration of non-workers engaged in non-farm activities also increased. This goes in line with how as the younger workers, younger male workers, in fact, were shifting more towards non-farm activities. What we found was that the mean age of farm workers was around 40 years, and the mean age of non-farm workers was around 36 years. And what we found was also a significant difference between the mean age of farm and the mean age of non-farm workers. Further, what we found was the mean age of all other non-farm workers were also very different. The mean age of government or regular government salaried workers was slightly higher because these jobs require experience. We can explain that. But the mean age of workers engaged in casual non-farm activities or non-governmental service jobs or other non-farm jobs were also in mid-30s, showing a clear preference of the younger male population towards non-farm jobs. In terms of gender, however, this was a little different. Next slide. What we saw here was that among all farm workers, only 35% were male workers and close to 65% were female workers. And in terms of all non-farm workers, around 80% were male workers and close to 20% were female workers. What was evident was that young rural men had options of going for other non-farm jobs, but rural women did not have that option. There are not enough alternatives for rural women other than public sector jobs, which came across as the other sector where women workers were engaged in, other than agriculture and livestock rearing. Next slide. So in terms of education and the non-farm sector, what we observed was that more than 30% of the workers engaged in cultivation were not literate or did not have any formal schooling. And for agricultural workers, again, around 33% of them were not literate or had any formal education. This was in contrast to the non-farm workers, where only close to 13% were without any formal education. In case of the non-farm casual workers, around 23% of them are without any formal schooling. Close to 55% of the government and semi-government workers had studied at least till some secondary education. 66% of the non-governmental workers have at least completed secondary education. So that's what we found. And the other result was that around 59% of the workers involved in animal husbandry, and these were mostly women workers, of course, have completed secondary education. Comparison of the mean years of education for farm and non-farm workers showed there is a significant difference between the mean years of education for farm workers and a mean years of education for non-farm workers. We also found considerable variations of in the mean years of education for different non-farm workers. Next slide. With this in context, now I want to talk about how I was trying to understand poverty levels in rural households. And for that, what I devised was a multidimensional poverty index. NITI Aayog, the nodal agency of India, which has adopted a multidimensional poverty index for India. So our model is very similar to the NITI Aayog's methodology, which is in turn based on the global MPI calculated using the Alpide-Foster methodology. So according to this, we have 3 dimensions: health, education, and the standard of living, and 12 indicators, and with weights given. I will not spend much time here though. I'll just quickly give an example. Next slide, Utkarsh. Just quickly give an example of how a household was considered to be deprived or not. So let's say in terms of the standard of living, and one of the indicators was cooking fuel. So a household which cooks with dung, agricultural crops, shrubs, wood or charcoal or coal was considered to be deprived in this form of methodology. Next slide. What was found was that we saw that close to 53% of the households were multidimensionally poor in our survey. Now, this proportion is very high compared to what NITI Aayog's data says. And one reason behind that, I would like to explain that using an example is, let's say, a lot of these households were covered under government scheme of toilet construction. So a lot of these households did have toilets, but these toilets were mostly broken down, worn out, or have become so obsolete that the households were forced to use kacha means of toilets. Or the example of LPG, where the households did fall under the government scheme of LPG connection, but because of the high cost of LPG, they have always resorted to using other means of fuel. So as Ghatak and Kumar call them MPI in the context of India as more of an index of service delivery, we do not know what the effectiveness of these services have been. The services have reached the households, but in my field, I found that the effectiveness of these services, however, was very different from the picture. Next slide. So based on that, I just want to talk about what the determinants of multidimensional poverty has been at the household level, and I'm only using my descriptive data for this. So one interesting factor was the location. So a household located in the hill district was seen to be multidimensionally poor, while a household located in the tea estate present village was more likely to be not multidimensionally poor. Now, the hill district is remote and non-accessible, and so this goes in line with that. But the tea community in Assam is one of the most vulnerable communities, and what we found was that a household located in a tea village or in a tea district is more likely to be not multidimensionally poor. Now, this again perhaps goes with the idea that most of these services were delivered and they have been covered, so they were more likely to be not multidimensionally poor. So we also found that a household located in a flood-prone village to be more multidimensionally poor. So yes, location is playing an important role. For example, there was this one village from the Nagaon district in Guwahati, which has been affected by flood almost every year. So factors like this does impact the multidimensional poverty level of the household. In terms of religion, Hindu households are more likely to be not multidimensionally poor, while Muslim and Christian households were found to be more likely to be multidimensionally poor. In terms of caste, again, I found that a general caste household is more likely to be multidimensionally poor. Again, I want to reiterate that in my fieldwork, most of the Muslim households came under the general category. So this could be, again, a reason behind that. So SC households are more likely to be multidimensionally not poor, while ST and OBC households were more likely to be multidimensionally poor in our study. Next slide. The mean household size of the multidimensionally poor households was found to be around 5.05, and the same for the non-multidimensionally poor households was found to be around 4.45. And this difference was found to be statistically significant. We also found that the difference in the per capita income of the two types of households was also statistically significant. In terms of land ownership, the difference between poor and non-poor households, again, was seen to be statistically significant. The mean age of the head of the household of multidimensionally poor households was around 51.64, and the mean age for the non-poor households was around 56. Again, this difference was seen to be statistically significant at 5%. We also saw this would imply that the multidimensionally poorer households had a younger head of the household as compared to the non-multidimensionally poor households. The difference in the average years of education of the head of the household of the two types of households was also seen to be statistically significant, and multidimensionally non-poor households had a higher average years of education as compared of the head of the household. The difference in the two groups of households in marital status and gender of the head of the household was, however, found to be not statistically significant in our data set. Next slide. Now, I just want to understand how the engagement or involvement in non-farm activities have impact on rural poverty, on rural multidimensional poverty level. So I've already talked about how I've categorized my households into farm households, pluri-casual non-farm households, regular non-farm households, pluri-self-employed non-farm households, purely self-employed non-farm households, and purely casual non-farm households. So from the data, what I found was that farm households are more likely to be multidimensionally poor in my data set. And among all the 5 different kinds of non-farm households, the pluri-casual and purely casual non-farm households were more likely to be multidimensionally poor. Hence, households which rely on casual non-farm income solely or with diversification are more likely to be multidimensional. What I also found was that regular salaried non-farm households were more likely to be not multidimensionally poor. But in terms of self-employed non-farm households, we find that pluri-self-employed non-farm households are more likely to be multidimensionally poor. But we did not find any such difference for the purely self-employed non-farm households. So diversification for the non-farm self-employed households plays a role in the poverty level of the household. Next slide. In terms of understanding the composition of non-farm employment and multidimensional poverty, what we find is that close to 61% of the farm households were multidimensionally poor, but only 51% of the households, again, were multidimensionally poor. What I also find in terms of the non-farm households, around 81% of the non-farm, purely casual non-farm households were multidimensionally poor, while only around 20.88% of the regular salaried non-farm households were multidimensionally poor. Next slide. So, to understand the contribution of non-farm employment on deprivation of each of the dimension, each of the multidimensional poverty dimension, what we see is that the purely casual non-farm households have contribute the highest to educational deprivation. And we find that purely self-employed households contribute the highest in terms of health deprivation. In terms of standard of living deprivation, we find that, again, purely casual households contribute the highest in standard of living deprivation. So with that, next slide, I would want to conclude my presentation by quickly laying out what my findings were. So rural prosperity.
You have about 2 minutes to do that. Thank you.
I'll just quickly wrap up my conclusion there. So rural prosperity can be understood not just by per capita income. So for that, the idea was to have a more multidimensional understanding of poverty, which I have used in my data set. What I've talked about is a graying of agriculture and a movement of young people away from agriculture to non-farm activities. But I also and we found significant difference between the mean years of education for farm and non-farm workers. We also found difference in the mean years of education in the various non-farm activities. The other factor that Mohanty and Lenka also talked about, or some recent literature has talked about, is how institutions like marriage have also governed the participation of non-farm activities. Findings have shown that younger, well-off and or even progressive farmers are worse off as compared to their counterparts who are engaged in informal urban employment in the marriage market. But what we've also seen is a gendered pattern in the non-farm employment, in the sense that while young men are moving away from agriculture, a lot of the younger women do not have that option. So there has been a very gendered pattern in the non-farm employment market. Next slide. So the other factor we saw was how the distribution and the incidence of land shows that landless and casual and marginal landholders in our survey were mostly engaged in non-agricultural labor. So none of the landless households had agriculture as their major activity. We also saw that most of these households were also engaged in some form of petty trading or petty businesses. So non-farm self-employment in such a sense has emerged as a very important alternative in absence of regular salary jobs. So households which are either purely self-employed in non-farm activities or in casual non-farm employment are more likely to be multidimensional poor as compared to households which diversify their employment. Employment in only petty non-farm self-employment, hence, is not enough to escape poverty. So in such a sense, a diversification of rural income has become important in understanding the rural multidimensional poverty levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ritwika. That was empirically very detailed, and you crammed it into half an hour really very well. Congratulations. Let us jump to the very rich set of comments in the chat. And while they've been coming in, there are some about framing, some about theory and method, some about classification, one or two about concepts, and one about policy. So what I'd like to do is to begin with Sudhir Kumar Goel's comments, which boil down to the question that is provoked by your idea that 75% of India's rural population is dependent on agriculture. And he shows from NABARD data that this is far less. So he shows in quite a lot of detail. So the first question, which I think we can park now, I will ask it and then hand over to Professor Bedamatta, is whether agriculture is less advanced in Assam and whether that data that 75% depended on agriculture is all India or for Assam, because he disputes the idea that it's for all India. I will leave it there. It's a longer comment. Please don't answer it now, because it's really important that we turn to our official discussant. Okay, I would like to call on Professor Bedamatta now, Rajshree, to discuss this paper. And then we will open it up to what is already quite a congested chat box with a lot of very, very interesting questions. Rajshree.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Barbara. I'll quickly sort of try to summarize Ritwika's presentation in a few points, which I think she was trying to drive home here. But before I do that, let me congratulate Ritwika for this presentation, because there have been much work in the context of rural non-farm incomes based upon large-scale survey data in Assam. And in fact, the Assam's landscape and the geography is such that to come up with income estimates, and whether it is farm sector or the non-farm sector, poses various kinds of challenges. And to be able to at least attempt to do something like this in itself is challenging, and also I think is an important task. So I would like to congratulate Ritwika for attempting this. I think what she was trying to do in this presentation is to drive home 3 points. One is with regard to transformation towards the rural non-farm sector, which I think is slightly underdeveloped in the context of her argument, because the transformation that she is talking about in the context of the rural non-farm sector probably requires a little more delineating of identifying the rural non-farm sector.
Professor Rajshree, your network is breaking. You can turn off the camera and
Activities in the rural non-farm sector.
Please, can you turn off the camera? Because you're frozen and we can't, I don't think anybody.
Because,
What a shame.
Professor Rajshree, can you hear us? We are trying to turn off your camera, but because your video is, I think your network is low and we can't.
Both the PLFS data and the erstwhile NSS EUS data points to the own account activities. Yeah, is this okay? Am I audible?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we can hear you better, a bit better now. Yes.
Now we can't hear at all.
No, we lost her. She's not in the meeting anymore. I think she has joined back.
Okay, she's hello. Yeah.
Yeah, she is
yeah,
joined.
She is joining. Yes.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm very sorry, but there has been some connection issues on my end. What I was trying to say is that the thesis that there has been a transformation in the rural non-farm sector, I think requires a little more of delineation as to what are the non-farm activities really, because the official large-scale data that we have from the PLFS, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, as well as the NSS EUS from 2011, points to a rise of own account activities, particularly in the context of female labor. And because Ritwika is making the point that in the rural non-farm sector, there seems to be a feminization of workforce as far as agricultural labor is concerned. and there is more of masculinization of workforce as far as the non-farm sector is concerned. But then the data clearly points to rise of own account activities in the context of women more, and men seem to be falling out of employment there. So that bit is a little unclear because we do not have much empirical data there. So it will be interesting to know what's happening there really. The second point that I wanted to talk about is the village data. Now, one of the, I think, fallacies that we make in the context of northeastern states, but Assam included, is that we tend to align the social group categorization data with the categorization that we follow for other states in India. So, for example, general households or SC households, ST households. Now, these categorizations actually fall flat in the context of northeastern states. Now, I think because there is village level data, it would be best to look at the ethnic categories, the ethnicities. So, for example, if you look at Hailakandi, now Hailakandi is of course a Muslim dominated region, but then Hailakandi also has the T tribes. It is Muslim dominated, but the Barak Valley region itself comes with its own, able to compare Hailakandi with, let's say, Nagaon itself is, I think, problematic. So it will be, and in fact, if you look at Dima Hasao, and if you look at Bongaigaon, and you look at Sonitpur, you have the Bodo tribes who, although they are the tribes, they are plains tribes, and they share characteristics, at least in the agrarian sense, they share characteristics with the so-called general category households that we see in, let's say, mainland India. But the Garo tribes, the hills tribes, have a different kind of an agrarian setup altogether. So I think the fallacy of looking at social group composition only based upon SC households, ST households, OBC households does not make much sense in the context of northeastern states. And that is something that must be revisited, and scholars working on the region based upon village data have the wherewithal to go deeper into these categorizations. I'll give you an example. In the context of India, the ST population is about close to 8%, I think. But in the context of Assam, the ST population is about 13%. But within that, the diversity is huge. In fact, Ritika, you mentioned about Muslims identifying themselves as the general category households, and you also mentioned that probably it is because of lack of awareness. It is not so. Muslims are categorized as general category households within Assam, but there are Muslim households who are also categorized as most other backward classes, or the MOBCs. So there are very many diversities with regard to official categorizations and how households themselves are identifying in terms of social group composition in the context of Assam. And therefore, I think that the activity classification that you have carried out based upon the official data social group classification of SC, ST, OBC general is probably muddling up your data, which I think will probably give out more, some enriched ideas about non-farm activities. I'm glad that you have carried out these categorizations of pluri-casual, pluri-self-employment, and pluri-non-self-employment. These kinds of categorizations you've carried out, and probably you need to dig deeper into these classifications and etch out what are the non-farm activities within each of these categories. So that's the point that I wanted to make there. Now, the third important point that Ritika, you were trying to make is about multidimensional poverty. And you were sort of trying to relate it to the non-farm sector and the different activity categorizations. I mean, that bit is a little unclear in your presentation because they are not occupation categories, they are not activity statuses. But probably a little more clarification as to these activity types in the context of rural non-farm sector of Assam is muddled up. So that needs a little bit more of clarification there, because you have village data, and also because you are connecting it to multidimensional poverty, and you are saying that multidimensional poverty among the rural self and non-farm self-employed is high. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but probably that's the point you were trying to make. You also said that non-farm, the multidimensional poverty among casual non-farm sector was very high, which it is understood must be very high. Now, if you look at multidimensional poverty index calculation across any region in India, the estimates would actually come out to be higher than what the Niti Aayog gives out. So that's understood, because when you base multidimensional poverty calculations upon village data, it gives you more more realistic real-time data in a way. So it is understood that these estimates are very high, and also because of the geographical the geographical makeup of Assam, because you have Brahmaputra running from middle of the state, and then you have the Borak Valley zone, which completely sort of separates Hailakandi, Karimganj, and Silchar from the rest of the state. And then you have Lower Assam, Upper Assam. I would have found it much more interesting if you had actually followed the Lower Assam, Upper Assam classification, and then looked at what kind of transformation is taking place in the rural non-farm sector in Upper Assam and Lower Assam. Because when you say that the tea estates or the tea garden households do not seem to be so much multidimensionally poor as compared to the rest of the households from the village data that you have, it raises a lot of questions. Because it is true that the tea garden households are working from within the tea garden premises, and they have some social security in terms of workplace security, or some health let's say some security in terms of health and well-being from their employers and so on. But it does remain the fact in terms of nutritional insecurity, they are highly vulnerable. So even in fact, in terms of education, many tea garden workers have been there's a lot of mobility from the tea gardens also. But then the historical the way the historical make of the tea gardens is such that they cannot move out of the tea gardens because they do not have property land rights or ownership or land ownership. So these are issues that have not been adequately dealt with in the paper, I think. But overall, I would say that it does make an attempt at you have carried out a survey among 329 households across 18 villages, and the villages that you have chosen are also spread out across some of the most vulnerable districts of Assam. So you have Golaghat there, you have Nagaon here, you have Hailakandi there. So it would have been much better to look at the village level precarity. What are the different precarious conditions? Because Hailakandi is right at the border of Bangladesh, and so if you are bringing out the details of where are they going for non-farm sector work, what is the kind of non-farm sector work that a person in Hailakandi and a person in Bongaigaon, let us say, is going to. So these are the kinds of, I think, differences. If that could have come out from your study, it would have been very interesting. Maybe you have the data from your field, and if you could etch the data out, not based upon the social group composition at the all India level, the way we carried out in NSSO or PLFS, let us say, but if you can have your own categorization based upon ethnicity data that we have, then this will give us a more appropriate picture about what kind of transformation really we are seeing in the rural non-farm sector. So I am sorry I have been going in and out, but these are some of the points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a really exceptionally interesting discussion and raises some questions which are repeated in the chat. While this was taking place, the foundation has said that we can go over the limit. We can, because we lost some time, we can spend a little more time in question and answer and discussion. So for the moment, would you like, Ritwika, would you like to respond to some of those questions raised by Rajshree, by Dr. Bedamatta?
Yes.
We'll go to the general chat.
Yes, absolutely. One point, so the point on the tea garden workers, even I was a little surprised, and I did mention that in my presentation, that the tea community workers are some of the most vulnerable. It's one of the most vulnerable community in the state, and some of the nutritional levels and the maternal mortality rates, or even the child mortality rates, are very bad for some of these districts where the tea community households are present. But in my data set, I probably because the focus was on multidimensional poverty, and most of the services have been delivered to these households. So yes, probably that could be one anomaly why the results say I got these results. And in terms of categorization, I did attempt to look at ethnic data, but it was a difficult task because, like you said, there were Boro households, but the numbers were not a lot. Or in terms of, let's say, Tiwa households, again, the numbers were not a lot. So I can go back and look at some of those data again. And I mean, eventually, that's why I realized that maybe I should do an all India level categorization here. But you are right about that, because I also felt that a lot of the things are getting hidden because of the way we have defined or categorized the households. So I'll definitely go back to that. Yeah, so I think those would be my response.
Okay, should we now have a look at the questions in the chat box? And I want to go back in the first instance to Sudhir Kumar Goel's question that I summarized before Rajshree was able to establish her connection. So can you tell us whether your data isn't the latest data, which suggests, and in the chat, Sudhir has emphasized that the point is about the role of income in households rather than labor or other data about the character of the household. But the NABARD data suggests that the non-farm economy, all India, contributes only 15%. And your data?
So I have categorized, while calculating income, I've categorized some of the sources of income as crop production, income from crop production, income from animal husbandry or livestock rearing, income from agricultural labor, income from non-agricultural labor, income from remittances. So there was one question on whether I have looked at migration, which I have done. So that's a part of my other chapter of my PhD. But so what I found was that the income from farm-related activities or income from agriculture was less than the income from non-farm activities, or what I've mentioned as income from regular salaried jobs. And the income from regular salaried jobs, the proportion of that has been quite large, which has taken up a huge share of the income from non-farm activities.
That resonates a bit with comments by Jens Lecher and Abhishek about how you have classified the rural non-farm sector. And the question is, to what extent is the non-agricultural work in the rural non-farm economy? And we go back to a general point, which is this non-farm economy is a bit opaque in this presentation, something that Rajshree mentioned as well. So do you what is the role of rural non-farm economy and urban non-farm economy in your analytical scheme?
So like I said, if we go strictly, if I go by how I have categorized the income sources of the household, in that sense, most of the workers who are engaged in activities other than farm, other than crop production, other than agricultural labor, and other than livestock rearing. So these included activities like non-farm casual labor, activities like non-farm self-employment, and activities like government sector jobs, non-government non-farm sector jobs, and some other non-farm jobs. So I also had one category, a source of income, as income from remittances. So these and this was again a crucial point that I found from my findings, which I couldn't discuss today, that most of these households, around 20% of the households that I have covered, have used migration as a strategy. So the role of the urban non-farm definitely is important, because income from remittances do form a huge part of these households. But for this particular chapter, I was only focused on the rural non-farm economy, and of course have looked at income from remittances as well. So yes, maybe yes, I can just call it as non-farm economy rather than just rural then.
And Rajesh, lower down in the chat, is asking if you've got data on remittances, do you have data on wages from agriculture and from the non-farm economy?
Yes. So my yes.
Good. So I think that class of comments, of reactions, has been covered. So I want to go on to a set of comments about theory and method. Lakshman says, what's your theoretical foundation? Very simple question. And Kalol would like to know more about the methods and the field sites. And the way I put it when I was reading your PowerPoint was that the expectations that you have of your data are not hypothesized. In other words, they don't relate back to theories about, say, class or caste and the non-farm economy. You've done very well in trying to characterize Assam, how Assam is, how different it is. But we need some kind of theory of what the non-farm regional economy looks like. And some of the questions are anticipating this about hills and plains and tea estates and upper and lower and so on and so forth in terms of various sorts of classifications. And on your methods and your field sites, you have attempted to be very comprehensive. And I think everybody has respect for that purpose. However, a lot of the selections are purposive, and 5 to 10% in 18 villages, which you then proceed to generalize up, means different sampling fractions. So there are a lot of questions which have been alluded to generally in the chat about methods and field sites. Could you respond very briefly?
Yes. So the initial point was looking at, of course, and Professor Rajshree has also pointed out that a better understanding could have been by looking at, let's say, Upper Assam and Lower Assam, and looking at the administrative divisions of Assam and selecting districts from that. But what we had in mind was also how geographically different Assam is. So we looked at the agroclimatic zones, and the idea was to select one district from each of these agroclimatic zones, because even agroclimatically, there's the Barak Valley, then there are the hill districts, there's the Brahmaputra Valley, and it's very diverse in that sense. So what we looked at from each of these agroclimatic districts was the share of non-farm employment, irrigation levels, agricultural productivity, the type of soil that most of these districts have. And depending on that, it was done on a purposive level, that if districts with higher share of non-farm activities, or districts which showed variation in agricultural productivity levels. So that's how the selection of the districts was done. And then the blocks were also selected at a very purposive level. So I went to the community development officer. We had long conversations actually regarding the selection of the blocks, and then finally the selection of the villages, because some of these villages were very remote. Some of these villages had, let's say, very diverse demography as well, and a lot of tribe differences as well, which existed. So a lot of these considerations were made, and finally, I mean, yes, we selected some villages because I wanted to also look at a lot of ethnic, I wanted to trace the ethnic differences. So if I chose a Tiwa village in one district, I went probably for a Boer-dominated village in another district. So those things were considered while selecting the villages. And of course, now to just trace out the idea, I think it would make sense. It would make more sense to look at the data from an ethnic point of view, which Professor Rajshree has mentioned. I think that would give a better sense of how the households have diversified their sources.
Okay, since you haven't finished writing the thesis, I think you need a paragraph or two on why purposive was the basis for generalization rather than random sampling. Because it is possible, very, very difficult, but to do the whole exercise through random sampling. Anyway, let us go on to one subset of the set of questions about theory and methods. And Ravi and Vasundhara are asking about aspects of the theory that may or may not lie behind this piece of work. And Ravi is asking about the extent to which engagement in the non-farm economy is due to distress or is aspirational. And I think Chandrasekhar and Vaidyanathan in their debate in the 80s talked about speculation or voluntary investments in the non-farm economy. But anyway, there's the idea that goes back to debates in the 80s about different modes of engagement in self-employment in the non-farm economy. And Vasundhara is adding to that. Is there a relationship between position in the agrarian structure and the kind of activity in the non-farm economy? And that's been an abiding worry about how you characterize the non-farm economy. We know, you mentioned in passing things like construction, livestock, forget what else, public administration as a service. And we know from the NSSO, transport, retail, all these things are very important, but we don't have a sense of how it works in Assam. Could you respond?
Yeah, coming to the first question on how the emergence of non-farm sector has been. So there has been a lot of work done on this. And yes, the debate whether it's a dynamic emergence of non-farm sector or whether it's a distress-led emergence of non-farm sector leads. And I did start my presentation with a few examples of how, let's say, in the case of Punjab and Haryana, it's been a little different. And because these states have benefited from the Green Revolution, but there are states which did not benefit from the Green Revolution. And in the case of Assam, so this falls under the first chapter that I have worked for my PhD, which unfortunately I couldn't share out the results for that. So I did look at how the non-farm sector has emerged in the case of Assam, a state which did not see the Green Revolution as it was in most of the mainland states. And with the Lukist policy and recent focus on the northeastern region has now seen a lot of investment though. So in such a case, what I found was that the emergence of the non-farm sector in Assam has been both distress-led as well as dynamic in nature. Households with capital, let's say a general caste households with maybe some levels of capital have opted for non-farm self-employment activities. But we also found there has been evidence of a distress-led emergence of the non-farm sector as well. And I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Was the relationship, it was from Vasundhara, and it was the relationship between status in agrarian society and the kind of engagement with the non-farm economy that different households engage with. But you've started to answer it. And it may be that it's very difficult to a question to answer in the context of the chapter that you've presented. Then there are a set of questions about concepts. People who've written patiently in the chat box, I'm trying to aggregate them into themes. And one of the questions on concepts comes from Arpita. Can you tell us more about the power of multidimensional poverty versus poverty pure and simple? And I mean, it seems that MDP is a funny combination of more dimensions of private poverty and of lack of access to public goods. And can we tell from the fact of multidimensional poverty how multidimensionally poor households are? And can they be multidimensionally poor in many different ways? So there's a slew of questions about why you chose MDP.
Yeah. So the idea was to understand rural poverty in a more comprehensive way. And I felt that because, for example, I'll again give one example of the use of fuel wood, or using wood as a source of fuel for cooking rice. And this is a very, very rural thing, which is sort of very important in understanding the standard of living of a household. And like I've already mentioned, so Ghatak and Kumar did mention that the multidimensional poverty index can be seen as an index of service delivery, because the households would have an LPG connection, but what matters is, are you using LPG to cook your rice? And I tried to cover that in my questionnaire. I tried to cover these questions in my questionnaire, not whether you have an LPG connection, but how do you cook your rice? And I felt that households can be poor in numerous dimensions, in various dimensions, and especially in these themes which we often think are just there, but turns out the picture in the rural India is very different. And hence, I felt that a multidimensional poverty index made more sense in understanding how households are doing, rather than just looking at their income levels.
Okay, thank you. There are quite a few questions in the chat about Muslims and general caste, and why general caste is poorer, and whether you can isolate Hindu castes to distinguish within general caste. So Ravi, Nitin have asked these questions, and Rajshree also brought them up in her discussion. Because and there's a certain amount of curiosity about why Muslims consider themselves to be general caste. Could you develop this, please?
Yeah, so one major issue that I found, I mean, when I went to the field and when I spoke to the people, the issue of caste was a little sensitive to handle in that sense. And for tribal households, it was very easier to just ask them, how do you identify? What tribe do you identify yourself as? But for the Muslim households, when I asked them what caste would it be, a lot of them did seem to get very offended when asked the question. Yeah. And they said that Muslim households are general households, it's a given. And repeated pestering of this question, which I had to obviously, seem to make them even more annoyed. So this was something very interesting for me. So within the state, actually, I think recent data, there's been some recent mandate where government has said that there are 6 Muslim castes which have been identified in the context of Assam, but I'm not sure which of these fall under the general category and which of them fall under the other MOPCs. But I think that might be something which could be helpful to me as well. But yes, so most of, I mean, they all identify themselves as general households. What I can do instead is probably look at the caste and the religion data in such a way where I bring out that Muslim households and Hindu general households. Maybe I can think of categorizing these households in those terms.
Thank you. We have reached the end of our extended time allocation for discussion, but we haven't reached the end of the questions. And I'm really sorry if I've missed people out. There's a category of question, one about climate change and the non-farm economy, one about will you share your PowerPoint, and one about will you share your questionnaire, which I feel are good questions that can be dealt with after the end of the seminar. Anyway, at this point, I feel we've only just got started. So that's testimony to the richness of your project and your presentation, and also to the many, many detailed kinds of strategic decisions that you've had to make about classifying and analyzing the data that you've collected. Anyway, congratulations, and I will now close this part of the session and hand everybody back to the tender arms of the Foundation for Agrarian Studies. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. I'll only take a couple of minutes to propose a vote of thanks. I would like to thank Ritwika Patgiri for this informative presentation. I hope the discussion was as enriching for her as it was for us. We are grateful to today's discussant, Professor Rajshree Bedamatta, for her participation and valuable comments. We're also grateful to Professor Barbara Harris-White for chairing this session and her continuous support in expanding the scope of this seminar series. I'm thankful to the online team at FAS, Sandeepan, Tapas, Setu for their role in conducting this seminar very smoothly. I thank Rosa Luxembourg Steptown, South Asia, for their generous support in making this series possible. Last but not the least, we are grateful to all the attendees for participating and making this a lively discussion. As mentioned, this session will be made available on YouTube in the near future. To know more about the foundation and the work we do, please visit our website fas.org.in. We are also on social media platforms. You can find us at FAS Agri Studies on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I request that you follow us on these platforms to not just get updates about this seminar series, but also about our work today. We'll be ending this session with this. Once again, thank you all very much for your continuous participation. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Utkarsh. Thank you.